He was a powerful heir left for dead, trapped in silence while those he trusted plotted his downfall. She was the nurse who wasn't supposed to care, but couldn't turn away. When Christian Lancaster opened his eyes again, it wasn't just to reclaim his empire, but to fight for the woman who believed in him when no one else did. Their story is one of betrayal, hope, and a love that bloomed quietly against all odds. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that touch the soul. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold steel, heavy and suffocating under the pale fluorescent lights. Everything was sterile, perfect, except for the man lying motionless in the hospital bed. Christian Lancaster, 32 years old, heir to the Lancaster luxury empire, the kind of man whose handshake could close billion-dollar deals. Now nothing more than a body surrounded by white sheets and unspoken fear. A thin scar traced his temple, the only visible mark from the crash that had nearly taken his life. To the outside world, Christian was in a coma, a tragic figure, frozen in time. But beneath the stillness, he was very much awake. It had taken him 2 agonizing days to claw his way back to consciousness after the accident. He had opened his eyes to a world where everyone he trusted had already begun to bury him. Christian had chosen silence, for now. He needed to know the truth. Needed to see who would betray him when they thought he couldn't fight back. And tonight, the truth came cloaked in whispered voices. Outside the thick glass door, the low murmur of conversation drifted in, fractured by the mechanical hiss of the ventilators. He recognized the first voice immediately. Miles Lancaster, his cousin, slick-haired, always grinning too wide, a man who had once joked that loyalty was just expensive real estate. "We need to move now," Miles hissed. "The board's restless. If we don't push this through, everything slips out of reach." A second voice, cooler, sharper, cut in. Victoria Lancaster, his stepmother, elegant, ruthless, and smiling with the precision of a knife. "Not move," she corrected smoothly. "Take. Christian is vulnerable. His assets are vulnerable. If we hesitate, we lose everything." Christian's heart pounded violently against the stillness of his body. So it was true. The crash, the rush trip he'd never planned to take, the guardrail that had given way without reason. It hadn't been an accident. The door opened with a soft click, and the air shifted. Footsteps entered, slower this time, lighter, careful. Christian knew that rhythm already. He had spent the past 2 weeks memorizing it. Emma Hart, his nurse, 29, quick-witted, stubborn in a way that only the bruised and the brave could be. She was different from the others. She didn't talk down to him or avoid eye contact like he was already a ghost. She treated him like a man who still mattered. "Good evening, Mr. Lancaster," she said softly, her voice a quiet balm against the sterile buzz of machines. She moved efficiently around his bed, checking his vitals, adjusting his blanket, brushing a strand of hair back from his forehead with clinical precision. There was no pity in her touch, just a kind of quiet respect that Christian hadn't realized he missed until now. She sat beside him, scribbling notes into a chart, then glanced around to make sure they were alone. Her voice dropped, lower now, almost a secret. "I don't know if you can hear me," she murmured. "But I think you can." Christian stayed still, straining to listen. "I took this job because I needed the money," Emma confessed, her hand stilling on the clipboard. "I didn't ask too many questions. But," she hesitated, swallowing hard. "Now that I'm here, now that I've seen things, I can't ignore it." She leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Your cousin, he was here yesterday. I overheard him talking to someone. He said you weren't waking up, and the way he said it," her voice cracked, "it scared me." Christian's chest ached with the effort it took not to react. "She should stay out of it," Emma whispered fiercely. "I should just take my paycheck and walk away. But I can't, not anymore." She stood, adjusting his IV one last time, then placed a book on the nightstand, a battered copy of The Little Prince. "I'm going to read to you tonight," she said, smiling faintly. "Something real, something human, because I don't believe you're just a name on a will or a headline waiting to happen." As she left, the door clicked softly behind her. Alone in the sterile quiet, Christian blinked once, slow and deliberate. He wasn't alone, not anymore. The nights grew longer after that. Emma began lingering at Christian's bedside after her official rounds, her voice dropping lower, as if sharing secrets with a man who couldn't answer but might still understand. She would read to him, not the sanitized hospital-approved literature, but real stories, poetry, childhood favorites, even pages torn from worn novels she carried in her battered satchel. Christian listened to every word, every laugh, every whispered sigh. In the darkness, he memorized her voice the way a drowning man memorized air. It was during one of these nights that he tried, really tried, to move. Just a small twitch of his left hand, a faint curl of his pinky finger. Emma was adjusting his IV line when she noticed. She froze, her breath catching audibly in the sterile room. Her eyes locked onto his hand, disbelief flashing across her face. "Christian," she whispered, almost afraid to hope. "If you can hear me, move again." A beat. Then the faintest twitch. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Tears welled up, blurring the harsh lines of the monitors behind him. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You're in there. You're really in there." From that moment on, everything shifted between them. Emma became his secret lifeline, his bridge to the world. She spent the next several nights developing a private code with him. One twitch for yes, nothing for no. It was painstaking, slow, frustrating work. And more than once Christian felt the weight of helplessness press down on him. But Emma never gave up. She celebrated every tiny success with a brilliant smile that made the walls feel a little less like a prison. One evening, after pretending to do routine checks, Emma leaned close, her voice low and urgent. "They're planning something," she murmured. "I overheard Victoria and Miles again in the stairwell. They're filing for emergency guardianship next week. If that goes through, they can move you anywhere they want. Do anything they want." Christian's hand twitched sharply. Fear, rage, everything inside him burned. "I know," she said quickly, soothing him with a light touch on his wrist. "I'm not gonna let it happen." She glanced around, then pulled a small object from her scrubs, a sleek, pin-sized camera. "I have a friend in tech," she said, a half-smile flickering across her face. "Don't ask. It's better you don't know. I'm going to plant this in the medication cabinet. That's where they always whisper, when they think no one's looking." Christian blinked once, slow and deliberate. "Yes." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "We'll get proof. And once we have it, we'll fight back." That night, while the hospital slept under the weight of its own complacency, Emma slipped into the medroom. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure it would give her away. She moved quickly, expertly, sliding the tiny camera into the ceiling panel just above the refrigerated meds. No one would ever think to look there. Back in Christian's room, she exhaled shakily and collapsed into the chair beside his bed. "It's done," she whispered. "Now we wait." And wait they did. Days bled into nights. Emma kept up the pretense of the dutiful nurse. Polite nods to Victoria, shallow conversations with the administrators who barely noticed her. But under the surface, she and Christian wove a world only they inhabited. One blink, one twitch, one silent promise at a time. In those quiet hours, Christian learned more about Emma Hart than he had about most people he'd known for years. She talked to him while adjusting his monitors, folding his sheets, checking his vitals. She told him about the little diner where she waitressed to pay for nursing school, about her younger brother, who never quite recovered after their parents' accident, about the dreams she'd shelve because survival didn't leave room for dreaming. Christian listened, not just because she was his only tether to hope, but because her words made him feel alive in a way he hadn't before the crash, before the lies, before the loneliness. Emma didn't see him as a billionaire or a bargaining chip. To her, he was simply Christian, the man beneath the title, the scar, the stillness. And for the first time in his life, Christian Lancaster realized that someone truly cared whether he came back. Not for what he had, but for who he was. The footage came quicker than Emma dared to hope. On the third night after installing the hidden camera, she retrieved it just before dawn, her hands trembling as she slipped it into the deep pocket of her scrubs. The break room was empty, dimly lit by the flicker of a vending machine light. Emma plugged the camera into her laptop, her heart hammering against her ribs as she pressed play. At first, there was nothing, just the low hum of machines. Then footsteps, voices. Miles. Impatient mutter filled her headphones. She's getting nosy. We can't risk her connecting dots. Victoria's voice, cold and composed, followed. She's nobody. Once the DNR's filed, once the estate is secured, we terminate her contract. Quietly. Emma froze, bile rising in her throat. They weren't just planning to steal Christian's life. They were already preparing to erase anyone who stood in the way. She fast-forwarded, watching in horror as they discussed bribes, falsified paperwork, and a chilling plan to file a false verbal directive that Christian had supposedly given before the accident. "We have the board in our pocket," Victoria said casually. "They want the embarrassment gone. 2 more weeks, and Lancaster Holdings will be ours." Emma yanked out the headphones, her hands shaking too badly to steady the laptop. Her first instinct was to run, but she forced herself to think. Christian needed her calm. He was counting on her. That night, she sat beside him as always, but this time her voice was steady, determined. "I got them," she whispered, brushing her fingers lightly against his. "I have the proof. We can fight back now." Christian's finger twitched once. "Yes. We need help," Emma said, pulling out her notebook. "Someone who can take this to court before they make their move." She flipped to the list of names Christian had painstakingly helped her build, one letter at a time. "Benjamin Cross," she murmured. "Your attorney. Your real ally." Christian blinked once, slow and firm. Without waiting another second, Emma typed out an encrypted email, attaching the footage along with a brief but urgent message. "Mr. Cross, Christian Lancaster is alive. He's conscious. What's happening here is a crime. Please help us. Emma Hart." She hit send, heart in her throat. And then she reached for Christian's hand and squeezed it gently. "We're not alone anymore," she promised. It wasn't even morning yet when her phone buzzed with a reply. "Received. Stay quiet. Help is coming." Emma sagged against the chair, exhausted but relieved. Christian lay still, but she could see the tension bleeding out of him. They had turned a corner, and now they had to hold on until help arrived. The next evening, as the hospital buzzed under its normal routine of clipped heels and sanitized smiles, Emma slipped into Christian's room with a plan. "It's time," she whispered. Brushing his hair back from his forehead, said, "We're going to wake you up for real." She had been studying his vitals, adjusting his medications ever so slightly, nudging his body to fight through the drugged haze. That night, after dimming the lights, she leaned over him, her breath a tremor against the silence. "Christian," she said, her voice trembling, "if you can, if there's anything left in you, please come back." For a long moment, there was nothing, just the steady beep of monitors and the low hum of machines. Emma's shoulders sagged, grief clawing at her chest, and then a flutter. His lashes moved. A breath caught in his throat. Slowly, painstakingly, Christian Lancaster's eyes opened, a sliver of hazel shining beneath heavy lids. He blinked once, twice, finding her face through the blur of tears he couldn't wipe away. Emma gasped, covering her mouth. "Christian," she whispered, tears spilling over. "You're back." He tried to speak, but only a broken rasp escaped. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "Don't force it. You're safe. I'm here." She helped him sit up slowly, propping him with pillows, guiding him with hands that trembled from relief. It was awkward, fragile, but it was real. Christian's hand found hers, clumsy and weak, but filled with intention. For the first time in what felt like forever, Christian Lancaster wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to live, and he was choosing to do it with her. The morning of the board meeting, the air was electric with anticipation. Christian sat upright in a wheelchair, a dark tailored suit, covering the thinness that weeks of forced stillness had left on his frame. Emma knelt beside him, smoothing a wrinkle from his cuff, her hand steady, even though her heart was a wild drum in her chest. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. Christian's eyes met hers, stronger now, burning with a quiet fire. "I'm ready," he rasped, voice rough but certain. Benjamin Cross arrived precisely at 9, with a team of assistants and a locked briefcase. Together they moved through the hospital's labyrinthine halls, passing curious glances and muffled whispers. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, wide and imposing. Inside, Victoria stood at the head of the table, dressed in flawless ivory, exuding the confidence of someone who believed victory was already in her grasp. Miles lurked nearby, shifting nervously. "Thank you all for coming," Victoria began smoothly, her voice a silk-wrapped dagger. "Today, we move forward for the good of Lancaster Holdings, transferring temporary control to the family until Christian's condition." The door slammed open. Gasps broke out, heads turned, and there he was, Christian Lancaster, alive, conscious, undeniable, wheeled in by Emma with quiet pride. Victoria's voice cracked mid-sentence. Miles paled to the color of ash. Christian rolled to the center of the room, placed his hands on the table, and pushed himself shakily but purposefully to his feet. The room was frozen in stunned silence. He let it stretch for a beat, two, until the tension was a living thing. Then he spoke, clear and sharp despite the strain in his throat. "I see you've started without me." Cameras flashed. Whispers raced like wildfire. Victoria opened her mouth, but Christian raised a hand, silencing her. "Save it." Benjamin stepped forward, producing a tablet. He tapped it once and the room filled with the damning recordings. Miles's voice sneering, Victoria's cold directives, the unmistakable conspiracy. "Keep him sedated, file the DNR, remove the nurse once the paperwork is done." The fallout was immediate. Executives recoiled, reporters scribbled furiously. A board member actually stood and walked out, face-stricken. Miles tried to protest, his voice desperate, but Christian turned to him, his stare cutting sharper than any blade. "You would have buried me alive for a board seat." His voice never rose, but it carried a gravity that crushed any further denial. Then Christian turned to the one person who mattered most in the room. His gaze found Emma, standing quietly at the back, trying to shrink into the shadows. "I wouldn't be here without her," he said, and his voice broke just slightly. "While everyone else plotted, she stayed. She fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Heads turned, reporters' pens scratched furiously. Victoria's face twisted into a sneer. "You fell for the nurse," she spat. Christian smiled, slow and cold. "No, I chose the woman who saw me as a person, not a paycheck." The board murmured, a wave of disapproval crashing down on Victoria and Miles. Benjamin stepped up, announcing pending charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted manslaughter. The board moved to reinstate Christian's authority immediately. Victoria and Miles were escorted from the room, their legacy crumbling into dust behind them. In the aftermath, Christian leaned heavily against the wall, his body trembling with exhaustion. Emma rushed to his side, supporting him without hesitation. "You did it," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. He looked down at her, the chaos of the boardroom fading into insignificance. "No," he said, his voice rough but sure. "We did." Outside, the first real sunlight Christian had seen in months warmed the marble floors. It felt like a beginning, not the restoration of the life he had before, but the start of something new. Something built on truth, loyalty, and a love stronger than betrayal. He squeezed Emma's hand once, a silent promise between them. And for the first time in a long, long time, Christian Lancaster smiled without fear. The weeks after the boardroom reckoning passed in a blur of legal filings, depositions, and public statements, carefully crafted by Benjamin's team. Christian stayed mostly silent in the media storm, letting the evidence speak louder than any denial. Victoria and Miles were indicted, their names dragged through every headline, their faces splashed across news feeds, with words like conspiracy, fraud, and attempted manslaughter stamped beside them. The empire they had tried to steal was now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a monument to their own greed. But Christian wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in rebuilding something real. The first decision he made after reclaiming his authority was to step back from the daily operations of Lancaster Holdings. Money, power, prestige, had been the currency of his life for so long he barely remembered who he was without them. It was Emma who reminded him, her quiet strength, her stubborn kindness, her refusal to see him as anything but a man worth saving, not for what he owned, but for who he tried to be. changed him. So he poured his energy into something new, something that felt like redemption rather than ambition. The Hart Lancaster Foundation was born within months, dedicated to protecting vulnerable patients from medical exploitation and empowering whistleblowers like Emma to speak without fear. Emma resisted the name at first, her cheeks flushing every time she heard it spoken aloud. "You don't have to name it after me," she protested one afternoon as they walked through the first facility they funded together, a quiet, sunlit building nestled against the New Mexico hills. Christian only smiled, slipping his hand into hers. "You gave me back my life," he said simply. "Now we'll help others take theirs back too." They kept their promises. The first clinic opened quietly, without press releases or gala events, just a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by survivors, advocates, and families who had been failed by a system too often ruled by profit over compassion. Watching Emma that day, laughing with children, kneeling to adjust a patient's IV with practiced hands, tears shining in her eyes as a mother hugged her, Christian realized he had never loved anyone the way he loved her, not with desperation or possession, but with awe. In the months that followed, they carved out a small life together amid the noise of recovery. Their sanctuary became a modest house tucked into the canyons far from the city, where the sunsets painted the sky in violent reds and soothing golds. They called it the retreat, a place where no reporters could follow, no expectations could cling to them. It was there, one evening, that Christian knelt with a small box in his hand, the fading sun turning his hair to molten copper. Emma laughed through her tears, dropping to her knees in front of him before he could even get the words out. The ring was simple, a band of rose gold wrapped around a smooth piece of desert jasper, uncut, unpolished, exactly like them, strong, imperfect, real. "Will you marry me, Emma Hart?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not the nurse who saved me, not the woman the world saw on the front page, just you. The one who sat beside me when I was no one." She couldn't speak, she could only nod, tears spilling down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead to his. Yes, yes, always yes. They married in a garden behind the Foundation's first clinic, under a sky littered with stars, surrounded not by dignitaries or CEOs, but by the people who understood the cost of survival, the people they had fought for, the people who now fought alongside them. There were no paparazzi, no headlines, only laughter under strings of lantern lights and the quiet kind of joy that didn't need an audience to be real. Emma stood at the edge of the courtyard that night, watching a young woman in nursing scrubs share a dance with an elderly patient she had once feared she couldn't save. Christian came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "That's her," Emma whispered, "the good old who wrote us last year. The one who said she was too scared to speak up. She's applying to nursing school now." Christian pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because you answered." "No," Emma said, smiling against the lump in her throat. "Because she was brave enough to believe she could be more." They sat together on a wooden bench later that night, the stars thick above them, the laughter fading into soft music. Christian took her hand in his, the calluses of her palm fitting perfectly against his own scars. "Do you think they'll ever forget what happened?" he asked quietly. Emma looked out across the courtyard, then shook her head. "Maybe," she said, "but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that even if the world forgets, we remember. We remember that truth matters, that love matters." Christian kissed her fingers, slow and reverent, and they sat there in the quiet, not as survivors, not as headlines, but as two people who had once been lost and found their way home, together. Sometimes the most powerful battles we fight are not the ones the world sees, but the ones fought in silence. Battles for truth, for dignity, for the chance to be heard when others would rather silence us. Christian and Emma's story reminds us that even in a world tainted by betrayal, greed and cruelty, compassion can still cut through the darkness. It reminds us that real love isn't built on grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but on the quiet choices made in the hardest moments. The choice to believe, to protect, to fight for someone simply because it's the right thing to do. Christian's recovery wasn't just physical. It was the restoration of trust, the rediscovery of hope. Emma's courage wasn't just in defying the powerful, but in daring to care when it would have been easier and safer to walk away. Their story teaches us that no matter how broken the world may seem, one person's choice to care, to stay, and to speak up can change everything. So wherever you are watching from, take a moment to remember: kindness matters, integrity matters, love matters. Even when no one is watching, even when it feels like no one cares, someone always does. Sometimes, all it takes to spark a miracle is refusing to give up on someone when the world already has. We'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. And if this story moved your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here at Soul-Stirring Stories for more emotional journeys that remind us all what it truly means to be human.